Welcome to Superhumanizer podcast, where we promote empathy and understanding in polarizing viewpoints through stories told by people living them. Hey, wonderful Superhumanizer friends! This is Dr. Hani Chabo. Before we dive into this awesome episode, I wanted to take a moment and be real with you. So much work goes into bringing you these conversations. The research, the preparation, the production. It's a labor of love, and it's a lot of real work. If you found value in these stories, we'd love your support. Join our Patreon for as little as $10 a month. You'll get early access to episodes, extended interviews, and even direct access to Katie and I. Or you can send a one-time or recurring donation through our PayPal link. Both links are in the show notes below. You're helping us build a team to produce more content and inspire more humanity. Thank you. Now, let's get into it.
All right. Hello, everyone. Welcome back to Superhumanizer, where we look at the human stories behind polarizing topics. We really want to understand the folks working to make our world fairer, kinder, and more human. My name is Katie Bogan.
And I'm Dr. Hani Chabo. Today, we're so excited to welcome a very important voice in news today, Ahmed Shihab El-Din. He's a journalist who's been nominated for an Emmy Award, a producer whose work has been recognized by the Peabody Awards. He's a truth teller and a storyteller. He often challenges powerful people and tries to help us connect with each other. He's also a graduate of Columbia University Graduate School of Journalism, where he later came back to teach young journalists.
We're so fortunate to be joined by Ahmed, whose life story is really as interesting as his work. He's originally Palestinian, Kuwaiti, born in California, and grew up in different countries like Egypt and Austria. And he has this very special way of seeing and communicating the world around him. Many people will know him from Al Jazeera's English show, The Stream, which he both helped to create and hosted. And that show was new and exciting because it really let viewers be part of a conversation that they were being isolated from. It was even nominated for an Emmy Award in 2012 for its innovation and its insights. And he's made powerful documentaries for Vice, like The Cost of War in Iraq, A Generation of Birth Defects, which was nominated for a Peabody Award, as well as his BBC documentary, Queer Egypt Under Attack, which unveiled the complexity of certain human rights struggles across parts of the Arab world.
Wow. Besides these big awards, Ahmed has always been a leader in online news. Forbes magazine named him one of their 30 under 30 people making a difference. Groups like Amnesty International have praised his brave reporting, and he's still going strong. He recently started a new podcast called Out Loud with Ahmed El-Din. On it, he has honest talks with activists, artists, thinkers, and people shaking things up, people brave enough to question how things are. His podcast wants to cut through all the noise with talks that really matter, which really aligns with our why here on Superhumanizer.
So, Ahmed, you've spent your entire career helping us understand big and often overwhelming global problems, from fairness and identity to what's happening in the Middle East. In a world full of loud arguments and quick, unstudied opinions, your deep, caring, and honest journalism has been like a guiding light for so many people, and we just cannot thank you enough for sharing space and time with us today.
Oh my God, I'm so humbled. I feel like now you misled your audience. They're expecting something brilliant.
I'm certain that they'll get it.
Oh, yes. Oh,
Yeah.
yes.
We trust you implicitly.
Oh, yes.
Very happy to be here, really.
Habibi.
Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. So before we get into all the awesomeness that you are, so our audience believes us, we have a little tradition here at Superhumanizer, a game called What Brings You Joy that we play with everyone. Would you play it with us?
Sure, I love games.
Okay. Ahmad, Habibi, what brings you joy?
Dancing, particularly when it's windy. What brings you joy, Katie?
Amazing guest company. We've been following your work for so long. This is my first time getting to speak with you face to face. It feels surreal. I'm like giddy, and also I feel like my mind is opening in preparation just to learn everything that you're going to share with us today. So feeling a lot of joy in the curiosity about you and your story. Hani, what brings you joy?
Oh, I love that. I will echo that as well. I'm so happy to be here with both of you, and especially you, Ahmad, because you were the first person I ever asked to come on Superhumanizer back when we
Wow.
were in
Full circle.
agony. Yeah,
Fantastic.
full circle. Yeah, totally. So thank you so much. We'll also to see that you have a new podcast now that really aligns with what we've been trying to do. And for me to like watch you put more humanizing content out there, even more than all the humanizing content you've been putting out there, that brings me a lot of joy. Thank you. Back to you. What brings you joy?
Ooh, okay. Well, I appreciate all the love. I want to reciprocate it. But if I'm honest, what brings me joy is being around loving beings, particularly dogs.
Mm,
I mean, I think
mm,
be loving beings. So can many other,
mm.
obviously.
Yeah, I see the doggy in the background. Tell us about the doggy.
It's not my doggy, but you know, that's the beauty. It's not about possession. It's like love is abundant, and he gives me love when I
Mm,
see it, especially these
I
days.
love that.
We're always looking
Mm,
for love. So, yeah, creatures bring me joy.
mm,
Breathing,
Love that.
living creatures.
mm,
And you, Katie?
So, something that's been bringing me joy in the last week is I've been trying to balance time between academic and creative writing. And I just got a revise and resubmit that was really encouraging from the Journal of Sex
mm,
Research on
mm,
a paper exploring women's experiences of objectification and how it impacts their
mm,
sexual functioning. And just knowing that I can continue to do this work in the public facing activism and engage in my scholarship and take space for creative
mm,
generativity has been
mm,
bringing me a lot of joy and
mm.
feelings of balance. So a revise and resubmit at the Journal of Sex Research is like making me very happy.
I get that.
Honey, what brings you joy?
Oh, congratulations. That's amazing.
Thank you.
It's so important for us to be engaged in science while we are being activists. It's really
Yep.
serendipitous that you are saying that as well, because we just published some articles in the World Health Organization, Eastern Mediterranean Health Journal, through the organization Children Not Numbers, which, if you don't know the organization, they are helping to rescue children from Gaza to receive life-saving care elsewhere. And we were super humbled that in this particular issue of the journal, we had more than 5 publications that highlighted the stories of the children and what they're going through. And it's really like, it's hard to feel anything more than just hopeful that their stories are going to be heard in these scientific journals. But I would say it's not something that brought me joy, but it's certainly something that brought me pride to know that I'm
Mm.
a small part of the scientific body that's helping shed light on the stories of these children. Back to you.
How many rounds is it?
3.
Great.
One
3.
more.
So this
Yeah.
is the culmination.
Mhm.
What else brings me joy? I was going to say something more generally. I think
Yes.
building off what you both shared, being
Mhm.
in connection, especially these days, I can attest that I felt a lot of disassociation, disconnection. And so when sort of
Mhm.
serendipitous things happen wherein you sort of collide with people who connect with you on a level very naturally, it's like you feel this very innate gratitude, to your point, and joy that they exist and that you can have those sort of surprising encounters that remind you
Mhm.
that there's joy and goodness and
Mm.
all that good stuff.
Mhm.
How about you? What's your third?
I could not agree with you more. I just went to this writing retreat in rural Tennessee. I was there for 6 days, and I was not expecting when I was there necessarily to wind up in conversation about Palestine. But one of the
Mhm.
other authors who was working on a collection of poetry there was a front facing activist in the Black Lives Matter movement and had also traveled to occupied Palestine in her youth and witnessed the apartheid in real time. And
Mhm.
she and I wound up having so many beautiful conversations about
Mhm.
how we came to like Zionist criticality, particularly coming from different religious and
Mhm.
spiritual backgrounds. And we wound up engaging this whole group of writers
Mhm.
in conversation about Palestinian liberation and creativity and
Mhm.
how these worlds really overlap. And it was such surprising kismet. And I think if both of us hadn't been on that retreat, I'm not sure that
Mhm.
conversation would have happened in quite the same like open-hearted and organic way. So this is me shouting out
Mhm.
Janisha and then Charlotte, Lori, and Christy, who I just got to spend a week writing with. I finished my third
Yeah.
book, a full draft of my third book,
Oh,
started my fourth,
Oh my
and we
God.
had so many conversations about liberation. Yeah, the creative generative energy has been very loud, and just those conversations are so moving. So, honey, my love, what brings you joy?
kind of echoing both of what you're saying about the kindness in humanity and how that's a source of hope and joy. I am often a clumsy person. As much as my life is put together, it's also very chaotic sometimes in my head. And so I left my mailbox key in my mailbox, which is a communal mailbox, the other day, and heard a lot from my partner about how clumsy I am and how I lose everything, and that's fine. And then ended up finding the key again in my mailbox. So somebody took the key out of my mailbox door and put it back into the mailing of the mailbox, and then the post office mailed it back to me.
Oh my God.
And that was a really happy ending to that story of chaos. And so the kindness of strangers really brought me joy and saved my marriage, I would say.
Hey, you should repay them somehow.
I know. If only I knew who they were.
You'll meet them in another life.
I
This
hope
is you
so.
putting it out into the universe too. It'll come
Yes.
back.
If you mailed me my mailbox, please contact me anywhere. Anywhere you can find me, I'll reply back to you. Thank you so much. I really, really loved that game. It was a joy getting to know you more through your joys, Ahmed. And now we will get to know you actually through your story.
Yes. So we know your background is so interesting. We did a little primer on it during the intro, but would you tell us more about your ancestry, your lineage, and how you became a journalist?
Absolutely. Ancestry, lineage. I wish I would have spent more time digging into the specifics of it. Obviously, I'm Palestinian in the sense that both my parents were born and raised there. My dad left in 48, my mom left in 67. I'm born in the States, as you said, raised sort of all over in Kuwait, Egypt, Austria for high school. And I think the most relevant part of sort of my history is that wherever I was always keenly searching for belonging. And I think that's like universal in the human experience. But I think for me, it was a lot of shuttling both between like like east and west, and in each place I had a very different attachment, different sense of identity, and that was fun to play with, also somewhat unsettling as a kid. But
Of
I
course.
carry I don't want to get too, I don't want to say negative, but part of what I feel rather than think or know about my ancestry is that it does feel very fragmented. Like I feel that it's really because when part of your history is so presently or so obviously about erasure, it's also about a lot of other things as a consequence, resilience and all these other things, right? So for me, I think being a journalist I always joke that it was a bit of a mistake. It was a haphazard accident. I always loved asking questions, and my dad had a lot of answers as a kid because he was quite smart, to say the least. And then I kept asking questions, and then I think it dawned on me at a young age that there's some power in telling stories. However you want to understand power. And so I think I chose to become kind of a storyteller, not just to do the obvious, which is to inform people things, but also remind people about things that are deliberately forgotten.
Yeah, unveiling that process of pulling back the curtain or lifting the rug and reminding folks this is here, even when we don't want to name it, this is present in our context.
Yeah.
And you have this remarkable gift. I mean, storytelling is not just a skill, it's really a gift. And I feel like when you have that thing, that spark of being able to pull a narrative thread for someone and engage them in unveiling, that becomes apparent to you quite young because other folks notice that you can do it.
Yeah, that's
So was there a specific time when you were younger where you realized, or the folks who were around you realized, Ahmed has a gift for this?
Oh God, you're making me really look at myself. This is like therapy, but better.
We get that a lot.
No, yeah, that's a good thing, I think, in this day and age. It's spot on, not just in, I guess, you applying that to me, but I've also, I mean, not to deflect, but like I've observed that in a lot of my friends' kids who are like quite young, but have that same natural kind of innate, voluble ability to connect different things in a way and make it engaging and entertaining. But yeah, I think like, I don't know, I can be vague about it and say it's in our blood, it's in our lineage, hakawatis, storytellers, cultural traditions passed on generation after generation. But I think that there was also something where, attention is obviously part of the equation when you're telling a story because you need to engage. It's not like, oh, all eyes on me, attention.
Yes, yes.
But I think to answer your question pointedly, Katie, I think, yeah, when I was about 6, 7, or 8, beyond the incessant talking, there was always performing. So I would tell stories through different modalities of expression. And that was something that I think came very, very naturally, maybe to my parents' concern, like a little too naturally. Some stories, did he really hear that? Like I was quite observant as a kid too.
Nice.
So yeah, I don't know. I think mostly it would be my mom who noticed and was probably the one responsible for cultivating it the most.
Mm,
It's
beautiful.
that natural theater kid energy. Relatable.
Handshake.
Yeah, we know you dance, and now we know that you are all
Yeah,
about
it's
all
so
kinds
funny
of
how the world is
performances.
like always, I guess it's like for me about the dance of it all. It's like, I mean, not to get, look, there was a moment during the last 2 years during the genocide where I just really needed to indulge in something that feels very, and maybe the way I presented it, people can argue about, but I think, you know, when you dance, I mean, it's cheesy to some to hear this, but I mean, dance is one of the most powerful forms of story, one of the most prime
Mm,
forms of
mm,
storytelling.
mm, mm,
You see that
mm.
across Palestine as well. It's not
Yes,
just abstract, you know what I mean?
absolutely. Yes. Maybe I'm wrong, but I don't know if it's a dabke there, but definitely
Yeah.
the dance that looks like a dabke in
Yeah, yeah,
Palestine
it is. No,
is
no,
a
you're
dance
right.
of resistance, kaman, yani. So I can't help when we're talking about resistance and Palestine
Mhm.
and just expressing ourselves and standing up for something that's right. The students at Columbia University were people that expressed themselves loud and proud and were our hope and joy for so long when it was peaking and it was going strong. And then all this cruelty happened with what we're seeing with the students that are being prosecuted unfairly. Mohsen Mahdawi, Mahmoud Khalil. It's just absolutely shocking what's happening. And you are a Columbia University alumnus, and I know you've also been to the encampments and you've taught at Columbia. So I wanted to know, what was your perspective or your experience when you saw all this happen?
I think one way of answering that is it was both and remains to be a real source of hope in this very dark time, especially when it first happened. It felt very authentic, very accessible, very diverse, and very much needed, like something that was a reaction
Mm,
to the moment and to what was happening.
mm,
And, you know, back then it was people like Katie, you know, and others who I came across who grew up in a very different context, religious, cultural than me, but there's some overlap. And I started seeing particularly Jewish students become a source of hope for me, for better or worse, especially between October and January. And I guess what I'm trying to say is
mm,
it's as much a source of hope as it is a source of sort of harrowing concern for where we're all headed
mm.
and kind of like what's really at stake and what's been the cost of this genocide beyond the obscene and sort of harrowing
Yes.
and sobering human cost. But
Mm,
the way that the student movement was crushed in such a well coordinated, well funded, and then also well defended or well obfuscated by the media. Like for
yeah.
me, I guess what I'm
Mm,
trying to say is like in the answer, just to connect the last two
mm,
questions,
mm,
I
mm,
can. When I was really young, you know, I realized I could help people understand complex things on a certain level. Like for example, when I ironically, there's a lot of displacement and disconnection in my family. So during the Gulf War, we were living in Kuwait, and then every summer we would spend the summers in California. Long story short, I found myself in California all of a sudden in public school, very different environment than where I was when I was living in Kuwait with my family. All this to say, it was there that I had to explain to kids, like, because the Gulf War started and then the US got involved.
mm,
So there were young people who were like, where are you from? Oh, I'm Palestinian. Oh, is that where there's war? Yeah. Oh, so it's the war in the Kuwait? No, that's another war. But are you also from Kuwait? Yeah, I'm also
mm,
from Kuwait. So kind of like that fragmentation of self and but also like having to explain that at a young age, I think gives you certain skills. Now, how is that connected
mm,
to Colombia? Maybe the
mm,
other time in my life where I kind of realized that you know, storytelling and me as a conduit could really help people understand not just complex things about my identities, but sort of the true profound potential of this craft of storytelling and, you know, the power
mm,
that comes with it is when I went to Columbia. Because before then,
mm,
I say I became a journalist as an accident because like I was younger and I didn't know what I wanted to study. I just loved to tell stories. I started writing for my school paper. Then I got into Columbia. And at Columbia, that's where I really, I think, cemented for me. I started to understand that this could be a skill, a profession, but also maybe it's just an identity, right? I'm a storyteller. This is what comes naturally to me. Okay, if there's a way I can do this and make money, great. Or earn a living, great. Or impact people's lives, all the better. And what I'm trying to say is witnessing the way Colombia played a role at the beginning of the student movement and then what that led to and how Colombia sort of cowered. I mean, it's been heartbreaking. It's been deeply personal as well on an identity level because Colombia, you know, even though I had a lot of friction there, it's undoubtedly played a role in teaching me how to interrogate power
Yeah.
and to watch the same institution, you know, perform power, cower to power. These students, you know, particularly Mohsen and Mahmoud, I mean, they're not just protesting, and there were, you know, and all the Jewish students who not only were there at the beginning, but who then went, what really touched me was seeing how they consistently across the US, but really the world, but in the US in particular, are the ones who stood in solidarity when when the what do they say when things got really chaotic. I saw more clarity and compassion at all the encampments that I visited in the States, but also in the UK, in the students and I've seen in any of the newsrooms or boardrooms that I've been part of. I mean, so for me, the crackdown at Columbia in particular was really ideological and it marked a really scary time in the US reality.
Mhm. Absolutely. As you're speaking about this, I'm thinking about the psychology behind institutional betrayal and some work by like Smith and Freud in the early 2000s, who looked at how sexual violence survivors interface with their institutions during
Mm,
investigations. And there's something so similar to me about these crackdowns from these institutions that are supposed to teach critical thought, actually examining primary source material, learning history, applying these pattern narratives to what they understand of the world. And the students are doing that. They're doing exactly what they've been instructed to do. And the institution is punishing them, expelling them, receiving their degrees. And there's this similar psychological violence that happens not only via the threat of censure and sanction from these institutions, but being taught to do something by these institutions, doing precisely that, and then receiving immediate and stark
yeah.
punishment. So destabilizing, not only for the alum, but for the kids.
Yeah, I just want to quickly affirm something that I think gets lost in this. It's like always an opportunity when there's a crisis, whether Gaza or Trump and the sort of crisis around democracy, at least that's how the media is framing it. I mean, Colombia could and should, they could and should be mustering the courage to kind of lead by example. Some people say Harvard tried to do that. Some people disagree, but they could have, you know, really affirmed what journalism in this moment is supposed to be, the fourth estate, rather than a rubber stamp for power. And they did the opposite, and they did it consistently. I mean, just the other day, I mean, I don't know if you saw, but they're like arresting, not only arresting students, but what was it? Did you see what happened yesterday?
Yesterday? No. What
Yeah,
happened?
yeah. Oh, anyway, well, I don't know. There's so
Jesus
many.
Christ. No, tell us, please. Look it up if
Well,
you
no,
would
I mean,
like,
like they're
please.
just reports. I don't know when they went to Butler's Hall and they
Yeah.
occupied it. They arrested 80 students, and I
Mhm.
guess I'm shocked at the way in which like it's always the university's police officers that are reported as being the more aggressive, the more violent than the actual NYPD police officers. I mean, suspending students for doing their job as journalists at a journal, not that it was the journalism school that suspended them, but you know, this is a university where the Pulitzer Prizes are. Like, it's shocking to me that these choices are being made. I'm shocking not because I'm surprised, but like I don't know if people is like, do I care about the stakes more than others, or do people not realize what's at stake? That's what.
Right.
Yeah.
Mm.
Yeah.
Great question. Great question. I've wondered the same myself, especially coming here as an immigrant, believing in the rights and the glitteriness of what I signed up for when I came to live here. And then watching all of that break down in the face of a very clear human rights issue, which is the genocide in Palestine that's been going on since 1946. And it's really shocking to me I feel like I'm living a double life sometimes, when we're seeing all my progressive friends and how like angry they get about DEI issues. And, I've been a DEI champion in the medical field, but then it's like DEI excluding Palestine. It's shocking. And then to see the actual law go after people who are standing up for basic humanity on Palestine. And then what happened to green card holders is quite shocking in terms of what that means as the law for all of us in this country, no matter who we are. And we're certainly seeing that happen now. They're threatening medical institutions and medical journals. The American Academy of Family Physicians, my own society, had to put out a statement, and they usually don't get political at all. And that was the first time, they got political, I guess. But talking about journalism and honest journalism and telling stories, you made documentaries like Queer Egypt Under Attack for the BBC, which showed how LGBTQ plus people in Egypt are targeted by gangs and even the police, sometimes through dating apps, and you used special technology to protect their identities because those were brave people who shared their experiences and needed protection. You told sensitive stories of the dangers people face from long-term effects of war, as in your Peabody-nominated film on Iraq. So you've spent your whole career reporting on the oppressed and less fortunate, which we've heard a little bit about why you do that. And I'm wondering what keeps you sane and helpful and human in this when you can easily get mad and hateful.
That's a great question. What keeps me human is the process of doing that work in a weird way. These places that I go to, or that anyone goes to, more than anything, they are mirrors. And what they often reflect to me, about who I am or who we as a collective are, is really profound and keeps me feeling human, because the way I can connect to someone in their truth without judgment or suspending my own perspective, it's like a way, for me, that's when I feel most energized, or at least during my career when I was a field reporter. I mean, I go to them not out of courage. People are always like, you're so brave, you were here, you were there, you did this. But to me, I know it sounds like maybe righteous, but like it's really out of conscience, like the name of flotilla that was so brutally attacked just a week or two ago. I mean, I'm drawn to people, I think, who are complex, who have struggled, who've been silenced, who've been marginalized, not because I think they need me or it's some like complex, but because I really think we need them. We need them to keep us sane. We need them to keep us not just humbled, we need them to keep us honoring what it means to be us rather than us and them, not reducing marginalized communities to trauma, but showing their joy. People use the term humanizing. I think it's overused, can also be somewhat problematic, but like just what you started this conversation with, showing people's joy, showing their wit, showing their survival. And so I stay grounded. I stay in that ritual of connecting with a stranger, finding what we have in common and different, and navigating through that, through remembering that anger, strife, differences without love, like I don't know, what's the point? Like, to me, that's when I feel most connected, when I'm in those places. It's weird. Not when I'm like on vacation, like, at some bougie beach.
That's beautiful.
But I do think there's something to the distinction between courage and conscience that I think people struggle with, like detangling those things, because they really are sort of mirror characteristics, can be challenging for folks. But you're right, like this is not always oh, look how brave I am, look at this amazing work that I'm doing. It's how could I not, when people are out there risking everything that is to be risked, how can I not at least attempt to be a collaborator? And I think the work that you've been able to do there in terms of elevation and making yourself sort of the human version of a megaphone is so spectacular and really important, and you've done it without sacrificing the fullness of your human self in that you acknowledge that you have a right to joy. If we don't experience joy, pleasure, groundedness, etc.,
Yeah.
we lose the reminders of what it is we are fighting for other people.
Yeah.
And when our movements police each other into misery as opposed to saying, like, I experience happiness and it is a tangible truth for me, and thus I understand why other people have the right to exactly this, and I'm going to
Mm,
fight
mm.
for that.
Yeah.
That seems like a much more sustainable thread, and I've seen you do this.
Well, no, Katie, you're really kind to remind me of that importance because, as I said earlier, without being redundant at the beginning, when I saw the documentary Israelism, I saw you, I saw
Mm, mm,
particularly from the Jewish community. I naturally needed to connect on some level, even if you and I never spoke. And I'm not trying to like overstate our connection, but for me, all those connections in the early days, I don't know. It's almost as if without those, like there were times where I was not experiencing joy. I had no capacity to feel joy.
yeah,
I
yeah.
was beyond depressed, and not to make it about me, but in those
Mm,
sort of moments of despair, it
Mhm,
was a really healthy and welcome reminder to me that solidarity doesn't require sameness. In fact,
mm,
intersectional
mm,
solidarity, resistance, whatever you want to call it, when I saw students, when I saw Jewish people, when I saw people from all sort of different backgrounds rejecting the binary that says if you support Palestinians, you're against Jews, or if you support Palestinians, you're this. They were
mhm,
embodying to me a truth that, may feel unattainable or not even real or
mhm,
possible, but that liberation is collective. And I've heard you speak about this at length. I mean, to me,
mm,
the deepest form of
mm,
anti-racist, anti-Zionist, is to insist on the shared humanity, even when this is
mm,
designed or to profit and pit us against each other. You know what I mean? Particular.
mm,
mhm,
And so when you say
mm,
that courage and conscience, I don't want to over philosophize, but I have a willingness to face physical danger, threats, backlash, smear
mm,
campaigns, around
mm,
whatever. And so I show up when the costs are high, and maybe that's a form of courage. But then to me, the more important and the one that I wonder more about is conscience. Like, it's like
mm,
why I tell a story. To me, I always like when I even used to try to work as a freelance reporter because I was so fed up with being, anyway, I don't want to get into it, but the point being,
Please do.
why and the how of why a reporter tells a story
mhm,
is reflective of something that I think helps keep this guise of objectivity that's done so much destruction to keeping the public informed. To me,
mhm,
it's like the internal compass and what it is founded from is like this core of what stories should I pursue? Whose voices do I want to
mhm,
center in a particular story?
Mm,
What truth
mhm,
should I elevate? As if there's one truth, as if it's
mm,
Israel and
yeah.
Palestine and that's it. I mean, those are all done to limit our understanding and therefore limit the possibility for solutions. All these things
mhm,
about,
Mm,
and so for me, yeah, the best
yeah.
journalism, you need both. And to report with conscience is a way to make sure that
Mm,
truth or truths serve justice rather than vice
mhm.
versa.
mm,
I'm hearing this metaphor come through, at least for me, of, we've talked about the narrative thread, and liberation is a
Mhm.
fabric. You do not
mm,
have to be the entire blanket or the entire curtain. You
mm,
need to exist
mm,
as a single thread, and
mm,
only through the process of weaving, which is one of the things that storytelling does so
Exactly.
effectively,
mm,
are we able to provide folks with the comfort that they need and really resource them. And so I just
mm,
so appreciate what you shared.
mm.
And Ahmed, I know that
Thanks.
you're a journalist with Palestinian roots. You have this special and deep understanding when you report on Palestine that just not everyone will share. And you've said that the Palestinian story is often not fully told or is misunderstood in the main news. And you've risked going on some really public shows like discussing this with Piers Morgan,
Mhm.
where these conversations get heated and you face questions or comments that, as you are trying to actively humanize this group, you are facing dehumanization and racism and this othering in these contexts. And I can imagine that there's a level of trauma or disconnection that you have to face as you're trying to advocate for your own people and your humanity so publicly. You've written on your Substack about, really thinking hard before going on shows like this, acknowledging what's at stake.
Mhm.
And so some of this has been, in this context rife with emotional and psychological violence. You've had to do this advocacy work, even beyond the physical and embodied violence that you face as a journalist.
Mhm.
But you've also worked on The Stream, which was nominated for an Emmy. You've brought all these different voices into conversation
Mhm.
that was heavily powered by social media, citizenship journalism, and such a shift from traditional news shows. And you've been able to really weave the fabric of this conversation together via, your different guests, activists, bloggers, everyday people affected by this work.
Mhm.
And you've been navigating this in the online space. As I'm asked this question, I'm also attempting to weave. So you've faced down Piers Morgan
Mhm.
and the violence of being in contexts like this. You've tried to create spaces that are much more actively humanizing via the stream and now via your podcast. And you've done this in an online sphere where
Mhm.
people are disinhibited and will say truly vile things to you because they see you as a media personality and they themselves are disassociated online. Can you talk about what it's been like to navigate those different social geographies as you try to do this work?
Oh, I really appreciate the question and the framing. For me, it's become something that's been conditioned into me. I think I've never been a patient person, but I always credit Pierce Morgan and others like him for making me more patient. Um, if I'm honest. And it's
All of
also
us
no, it's
with
also
you.
like, if I'm honest as well, it's really like unnerving that the tenor and tone of these conversations, forget like the lack of truth and all that other much more
Yeah.
problematic stuff. It's just crazy that it's skills I learned when I was bullied when I was a tween and a teenager that I use when I'm on those kinds of shows. I mean, back then I didn't have the the confidence. I think it's really just knowing that the truth is on my side, knowing that fact and
Yeah.
critical thinking is something that is not to be ridiculed or interrupted. So when they do, but I do lose my cool and I do wonder whether it's really particularly Pierce's show. I don't know how constructive or constructive an appearance on Pierce's show is for me as a Palestinian, as a journalist, as a political thinker, as a self-respecting human being. But the point is, I also remember, on Talk TV, on all these sort of, even Fox when I used to go on, even CNN, quite frankly, long before the genocide, unfortunately, they want you to come on and perform. I mean, when Pierce, any of us on, there's an aspect of it that's, that they want you to be a monkey. I mean, I was even going to joke when you asked me this really eloquent, well thought out question to just respond the way he would, which is, all right, that may be true. And we could discuss that later. But Katie, do you condemn Hamas? Or do you hostages to be released? Because, maybe what I'm trying to say is like,
It's so dance monkey.
exactly.
Yeah.
And so I
Yeah.
carry authentic parts of me when I'm there, right before we go live. I think of my mother's heartbreak witnessing another Nakba and the subtle changes in her. And for her to witness this, my cousin's bravery in Jordan or wherever else they may be living, I'm being vague on purpose. The archives of my people's dignity. I mean, I prepare by centering myself in my truth and not just showing up with a whole bunch of facts and persuasive points. I try to stay calm by breathing. I suck at it, but it is helpful. And I just try to remember that, like, I'm not here to. That's why, like, I don't want to get into the nitty gritty of the last appearance, but let's just say people are like, "Oh, but you said this thing, or you said exactly what he wanted you," and it sucks to say, but they just want you to perform. They want you, they want you to be a certain way, whether it's like a victim or whatever it might be, a terrorist, right? I mean, last time I was on the show with Sharon Osbourne, I was called a terrorist. I was accused of killing Jews. I mean, the level of and not even in a pointed, like, substantial way, just like, like when you're at a Trump rally and there's like 12-year-olds saying things. So yeah, I'm there to witness them as much as I'm there to be a mirror as much as I can
Mm,
allow me to be to their own
mm,
of humanity and critical thinking. But it's so sad, the level of discourse, not just on those shows, but really
yes.
in the establishment media across.
Mhm.
It's
Yes. Yes. So well said, Habibi. I really admire you when I see you on there, and I can tell. I mean, obviously, you're on there, and when you're being attacked in that way, you're not going to just sit there and smile, which thankfully, you're not that much of a monkey, thank God, right? Like, you're not going to just sit there and smile and take this from them. And it's, Heke, when I see you receiving that, we're all receiving it with you. And when you put on that brave face and when you stay eloquent, which you always manage to do, by the way, when you stay eloquent like that, we're on that behind that screen cheering you on and clapping for you and feeling so proud of you for standing up for all of us when you appear on those shows. And I also want to say, like, you're such a big figure for all of us, right? Like, you have 1 million+ followers on Instagram.
it's
People
very
absolutely
meaningless,
adore you.
honestly. I'm not trying to be
Sure,
I wish it was meaningful. I
sure.
mean, I know reach matters and all these, but yeah, I appreciate that.
But it's, it's there for a reason, right? I mean, it's
Yeah.
not just because you're
They're so
selling
they
a product or
and us, and then when the Israeli government makes takedown requests, they can approve them. That's why it's there. Sorry, I'm being very facetious.
I mean, the cynicism is welcome too. The cynicism is
yes,
absolutely
yes,
Sorry, I know we
100%
totally.
started
grounded
with
in
Trey, but
reality.
we're in the cynical mode.
No.
That's
No,
all
we
right. We can
totally
sink
feel
into that
you.
too.
Yeah, we
Love
totally feel you. And the reason I'm saying all of this is because in our own space, in the pro-Palestinian space, there's also a lot of dissonance. And
it.
I
Yeah,
love the word
there's-
social geography because so certainly we've had to navigate that space in our own movement. And there's a mental health professional here, there's a doctor, there's a world-renowned journalist and figure of humanity for us. And I was hoping maybe you could comment for us about, is the pro-Palestine movement monolithic or is it diverse, and how much diversity is okay if we consider the spectrum from thawabit to acceptable normalization, whatever that means?
Yeah, it's a great, great, great question. And it's one we don't talk often enough about. And it's also one that in my first podcast episode for Out Loud, I chose to do it with Martez.
Mm,
And it just so happened to come at a time when he was maybe facing some of those divisions that it do exist in terms of the pro-Palestinian movement. And again, I frame my answer in this way because for as much as I think it's important, like I we all wish there was more unity in the world, in Palestine, in any context. But reality, to answer the question, is it's deeply diverse and much more so than we know. And I don't think that that's that's its strength in a way. So,
mm-hmm,
even
mm-hmm,
though there's room for disagreement, what I think Katie does so well and others is make it accessible to actually hold space for each other authentically, not with like a litmus test or of
mm-hmm,
how, politically aligned or righteous. I mean, the Wabid to the reformists, we're all reckoning with an open wound. So vilifying
mm-hmm.
people like Martez, as I saw happening the week I happened to
Yes,
interview him at the Web Summit, when I started seeing
yes.
I announced briefly on a story and people immediately, and it came from mostly Palestinians. And to me, it's such an obvious extension of the divide and conquer sort of nature of
Mm,
realism and its long lasting effects that it's so disheartening for me to see. Because again, I ask, why is this happening? Why are people vilifying? What is it? And it's understandable. There's resentment, there's jealousy, there's also just accusations, and but I think the most important thing that I can say, I mean, this might not be the most eloquent answer, but we really have to be willing to sit with discomfort without exiling each other from
mm,
the cause. I mean,
mm, mm,
without nuance on Pierce Morgan, it's the same thing that in the political context or the social context, without nuance, like we are not going to have liberation. For me, I'm super disappointed when I see, or even people saying, why are you amplifying this person? They're Jewish and they once were in Israel,
yeah,
or they have ties to Israel, or, and
yeah.
it's like, I'm very keen to amplify messages from a wide range of contexts that speak to the core of this thing we're discussing as it relates to Israel-Palestine, which is injustice and dehumanization at its core. That's what it's about. Because all the things Israel has accomplished since October 7th and the decades before are contingent upon, and it was clearly outlined. I mean, Katie's much more well-versed, I think, on this than me, but it was clearly outlined in a lot of the Zionist early ideologies. And what I'm trying to say is part of what made me want to create this podcast was to have a space where when I do talk about Palestine, when I do have Palestinians on, that it's not just diverse, but that it's a reminder. I don't know, for me, it's like in any movement, we often focus on what we shouldn't do rather than what we should do, what we shouldn't feel rather than what we should feel. And I guess to me, it's obvious that focusing on division at a time of so much fracture and displacement and erasure is just not constructive. And I know that's like, I'm not trying to judge it, but it's like I resist the urge to fall into that. And I think that it's not an accident. It's something deliberately being done. Does that make sense?
Yes.
100%. I think all the time about this idea of like no activist robots. Like the brainwashing doesn't happen in a vacuum. Like we are all fighting this wave of propaganda all the time. And like I consider the amount of privilege I had to have in order to unlearn Zionism. I grew up in this Zionist household. I'm the granddaughter of a Holocaust survivor. Like I was really inundated with messages about the benign or even munificent impacts of Israel on my family, and then had to go to a liberal arts college that didn't have a lot of public funds, so they were able to talk about the Middle East. And I was able to take coursework in Palestine. I had to be in the political science department in a program that also had a genocide studies focus. I had to have a professor who had been a journalist in Jordan and was more sympathetic to Palestine and brave enough to teach this material. I had to take coursework for years. I had to visit Israel and have the money to go and do
With all
that
the privilege.
and see the apartheid in real time. That's so many layers of privilege that it took for me to begin the unlearning. And so I'll meet people now who are in the very, very early stages of seeing some news that disturbs them, and they're not on board yet because they're where I was when I was 17. And I can't tell that person, fuck you, you're a bad person for not knowing this already. It just doesn't make any
But
sense. And if we are
that is the instinct of many, Katie. Like not many. I'm saying you maybe recognize that you can't do it because it's not going to be effective, let alone like conducive to any sort of outcome that is desirable. But that's what I feel like. I remember as you were talking, because some of those tidbits that you shared with us, you had shared in some of your videos. I found it so, I don't know. I don't know. I don't want to overstate it, but there were a lot of people, look, I'm just going to keep it 100, handful of people who initially were like, oh, but Katie this and Katie that, as people do. And, people do that to me on the daily. So it's like, I'm just, when I see it swell, when I see discomfort in any form around like a new way of understanding something that you care so passionately about, just by virtue of Katie and who she is and all those things she described. It's like when I see resistance towards that or reluctance to I don't know, that makes me want to double down on those sorts of things. And that's why I wanted to screen Israelism, even though it's like not a movie that's particularly for people already in the know about Palestine in the Arab world. But I think we can derive a lot from just seeing another person's truth. And why are you so uncomfortable if it's almost the same kind of in line with the same values? But we live in these tribalisms, so what to say?
So beautifully said. I totally agree with you. And really, I mean, it goes full circle back to the humanization, the undoing of the dehumanization that you talked about. And if there's not all the opportunity and gifts like Katie had to undo all of that, then us being together in solidarity and allowing difference and allowing opinion and going back to the shared humanity, like you said, that is actually what's going to bring us towards a solution It's not more dehumanization. It's not more polarity. And like you said, they want us to be divided. And so for me, I feel like it's really going back to remembering that solidarity is what's going to take us past the problem of this. And they are dehumanizing us. So we have to be better than them and their tactics. And we have to continue anchoring in our humanity, and diversity has always been consistently shown to be a good thing in any system, whether that's a activist movement or a healthcare system or the government or society in general.
Yeah.
And I love that you, on your new podcast, that's the whole angle, is to have these human conversations. I love that Mu'taz was your first guest on there, and you certainly had a very deeply human conversation. And I also saw some
Thanks.
of those comments under the post of
Yeah.
all the noise that comes with all the polarity in our movement. But when you were having your conversation with him, I felt like you had a conversation that allowed people to re-warm up to Mu'taz, get over some of their stuff, and warm up to the person he is. You sang with him.
I
You
appreciate that.
offered him to go on an island with you. So I
Yeah,
want to
yeah,
hear
yeah.
more
That
about
was
your
that
podcast.
was not the
Tell us
best choice
more.
of words, perhaps. Makes me sound more powerful than I am. But I'm interjecting for one thing. As you were speaking, I got giddy. It's like the ADHD in me, and I started thinking to myself, there were some people who were like expecting it to be more about Fatah and Hamas, or politically minded, or like more like gotcha, challenge him. And like, journalism in that context is about holding the powerful to account, and Martez is powerful inherently. But look, I also have come to know him somewhat. And in that moment, you got to do what feels right. And I focus on the feeling because it was clear to me that he was in a really low place energetically. And you can't
Yes.
have a certain type of interview. Not that I wanted to have an interview that was going to be about like, are you this, are you that? I wanted to have an interview that was going to give him space to breathe and space to be away from the headlines and from the visual. You know why? Because I started that podcast because I needed a space to breathe. Like I needed a place where I wasn't going to be reacting or trying to persuade people to care or to move or to do something or to inform people necessarily. For me, it was like, I want to be a conduit. And I had this ache inside me where I was, I love talking to people, and I'd sort of lost that love in the moment. And I wanted to talk with people. I didn't want to have this like الرأي والرأي الآخر, like the one view and another view.
Yes.
I don't think, there's a space and time for everything, but Mu'taz was an obvious choice for me just to frame it. And then people might expect it's going to be about Palestine all the time. It's really not. I want to talk about, I want to connect all the different ways we as individuals and as communities challenge the status quo, whether deliberately, intentionally or not. And just hope that people through hearing those will get inspired to do that in their own lives, like whether professionally or personally. It's so important because I think without that, given all the sort of trends with AI, with automation, with disconnection, with siloed, walled off identities on these platforms that previously were about democratization, like I worry if we lose sight of that, what the next 5 years will be like.
Yes.
I think one of the things that is so beautiful about the work that you do is this is the distinction between conscience and just what we understand colloquially as courage. Like you making that decision in that interview
Yeah.
was conscience over challenge, was conscience over an easy binary. It was humanizing this person. It was inviting nuance into this space. It was meeting someone where they needed you to meet them. It was the gut check of a storyteller and someone who is aware of mental health, being able to provide a grounding resource for a human being who needed it. And I think the demands of this binarist approach to these conversations really shackles it. There's an emotional violence to it. And you had a decision to make in that moment of, am I emotionally violent to this person who is clearly in a low space and needs to be reminded of a shared humanity and given camaraderie? Or do I cater to the politic of challenge as though that is really what purity is in this movement? And I just so appreciate that you made like an instinct derived choice. I don't know. I'm just
No, I
hearing you talk about that was really beautiful. Thank
Yes,
you.
agreed.
You know what? One thing that I really appreciate you sharing that as well, because after the interview, the guy who was filming it was with iHeartRadio. I was there for a workshop, and it was a serendipitous thing where it worked out that me and Martez would do this thing, and it was scheduled. And afterwards, the guy who was recording it, who I just met, turned to me. He's like, "Wow!" And he knew nothing about Palestine and Israel, believe it or not. He had just, come from.
Wow.
I mean, nothing meaning nothing beyond. And he was like,
Yes.
"That was so human." And it seems silly and cheesy, but when he was like, that was such a human interview. He was like, that was really great, man. And this guy, like, watches.
Mm,
And to
mm,
me, that was an affirmation, in part, some of what you were saying, Katie, that, like, for me, Martez's courage that was being hailed and that was being paraded after he got out of Gaza, for better or worse, I was
mm,
I was innately, like, worried for him. But his courage during the genocide, even since then, is really not just journalistic, right? To me,
yeah.
it was really spiritual. And the singing, I
Mm,
started with that actually, because I remember throughout the whole journey, there was this one story he had put up where he was singing with his friend, and there was like a cat, and they were just getting their things together. And that was such a human moment to me. It cut through everything, and it
mm,
did
mm,
something for me as an individual that was so powerful. And so I was like, how can I,
yes.
how can I
Mm,
not replicate this, but harness that? Because he documented life as much as he documented death. I mean, and that kind of
mm,
bearing witness deserves a platform, but much more importantly, deserves protection.
mm,
Oh,
mm.
ugh.
Wow.
Yes.
Yeah. Yeah. Beautiful. That to me is exactly what we need more of, especially for Palestine and the whole movement. And I saw you play your own "What Brings You Joy" game there in the beginning when you sang and you got to know
Yeah,
each other. And I
yeah,
had
yeah.
never known any of the things that I found out about Mu'taz that you held space for in the interview. And of course, I mean, you talked all about the movement and everything, but that where you captured that humanity and what you were trying to protect there was really beautiful. So thank you for that.
Yeah.
Would you give us a spoiler on an upcoming
Oh,
exciting guest?
spoiler. Yeah, I'll be honest, I was gonna do it weekly, and then for several reasons, I thought bi-weekly might be better, because really I wanna focus on the
Mm,
quality of conversation rather than, like,
mm,
trying to
mm.
churn out. Again, also what you were saying, now that ADHD is in full swing, Kate, for me, it's also about, like, I wish I created content with the awareness or intention to capitalize financially off of it. Because I say I wish, because, like, I think that's what most people seem to. I don't know, the people who criticize me tend to always say I should do that more. But for me, like, that really wasn't the aim with this podcast. It's really, it's like when people say you should write a diary, you do it for yourself, and maybe your diary will make an incredible book,
Mm,
becomes a bestseller, and, like,
mm,
impactful. That's great. But it shouldn't, for me, it's really not the intention. And that's why, whether it's Matez or one of the other guests, like, I have a few lined up. I want to do as many as I can in person. That's why it's a bit challenging. But let's just say
mm.
there's a female director who I admire greatly, who's coming up soon.
Oh,
And I think everyone will be really keen to hear.
yes.
I'm trying to find people who are well known, but also people whose own stories, friends of ours. Like, and this is what I
Yeah.
think. We have so many people in our lives who challenge the status quo. You could start with your mom. You could start with. I think finding that right balance of what it means to really challenge the
Mm,
status quo in so many different contexts for different individuals. Hopefully, that'll make the podcast worthwhile.
mm.
But yeah, I
I'm
didn't.
sure
I
it
didn't
will.
answer you. I didn't give you a.
No, you didn't. Good evasion there.
There's a person
Must be
No
an
else that's
skills
ADHD
coming
again.
on
skill
that's
there.
cool. There's an author that's coming on that's cool next
Oh,
tomorrow. Actually, I'm recording one more.
yay.
That's
Amazing.
Yeah,
awesome.
there's a handful of some unassuming people who I think I was really happy to get to know. So hopefully,
Yay.
small.
So excited.
Yeah.
That's fantastic.
Mm,
I'm aware of time,
Yeah,
so we have, I think, one last question for you and then some heart shares.
sure.
So we've talked a little bit about the challenges of navigating this conversation across fractures and across social geographies and in these different spaces you just mentioned, really wanting to bring people to your podcast in person and having that shared space humanizing experience. With all of the challenges we've discussed so far, what makes you hopeful about the future of journalism, particularly journalism about Palestine?
What makes me hopeful? I think there is a shift undeniably in terms of people being informed about Palestine. That inherently makes me hopeful. What also makes me hopeful is seeing the different ways people are resisting. Students who sleep in tents for justice make me hopeful. Queer
mm,
refugees who
mm,
still dance and
mm,
experience joy despite all the odds, whether in the States or anywhere else, make me hopeful. Journalists who keep going, independent outlets, people like yourselves, cultivating
mm,
conversations that are, constructive. Drop site news, place initiatives like that at a time like this as a journalist make me hopeful. And I think the next generation, it's obvious answer. I mean, sometimes I worry about them because all my friends have kids and they're really the way they are about devices is even more alarming than
mm,
my own relationship with devices. But that aside, I don't know. Hope springs eternal, but to me, if I'm honest, these days it feels
mm,
so elusive. Uh,
mm,
Yeah.
and when I,
mm,
when I talk to people who are informed and find ways to be optimistic, even if it's something as simple as like doing something they love, connecting with someone, that helps me stay hopeful. Palestinian
Yeah.
resisting, like Hamada, so many different people cooking, the different ways in which people insist on existing when
Mm.
they're really facing erasure, and that can be a physical or even people within jobs. You know what I mean? Like there's so many
mm,
examples of that in my communities. That keeps me hopeful. Yeah, and like I think kids, the
mm.
kids are right-ish. The world's screwed, but
Yeah.
the kids are all right.
Mhm.
Inshallah. Inshallah khair. Yeah. Yeah. Thank you for that. This brings us to our final question with you. What a profound conversation. I kind of don't want it to end, but here we are. So, before we go, we'd love to hear your heart share. We ask our guests to share something that means a lot to them. It could be a quote, poem, song, or a practice that helps you stay hopeful and grounded when things in the world feel complicated.
Oh, I should have prepared better. When things in the world, I'll just mention this briefly. I hope it's not.
Mm,
There was a encounter I had. So you know how in life you get depressed, and
mm,
that depression can be acute or chronic. And there was a period in my life when I was living in New York, and I had sort of a hapless, hopeless moment. And some stranger reached out
mm,
online. At the time, he was a stranger and invited me to tea. And I was like, this guy's pretty well known. He's an author. And, I had been engaging with some of his content because it had been helping me out, his writing, I should say. I don't know if you're familiar with Young Pueblo.
yes, of
Yeah.
course.
So you have that book, Inward and Clarity and Connection. And, there's people who are like, oh, it's so simple and it's so short. I don't know why, it's not so deep and like philosophical. It's kind of surface level. And sometimes for me, like with my maladied, messy mind,
Mm, mm,
really appreciate a very
mm,
accessible, very tangible reminder of what matters and what doesn't.
mm,
And there's
Mhm.
mm.
something I can share with you that I've always,
Yes, please.
like, he invited me to tea, we hung out, we talked, I learned
Mm,
Ecuador, this, that, and the other. And it was just a really momentous and memorable connection. And what is the one I jotted? It's from Inward. It's a truth that I think if I had mastered or become more comfortable with at an earlier time, it would have helped me. And it is short.
mm,
It is before I could release the weight of my sadness and pain, I first had to honor its existence. And to me, that is like a refrain that applies in my personal, political, and professional life. Where, you know, I have an instinct, like many human beings, to try to escape my sadness and pain in a different way. Whether it's about something as, you know, like Palestine or something very personal between you and yourself. And yeah, that kind of, yeah, I like what he helped me learn about.
Beautiful.
As a therapist on the call, I'm like, yes.
That's a good nugget to get out there.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that with our
Yes.
listeners. Yes, absolutely.
Yes,
Yeah.
thank you. And thank you for being so open about your own struggles with your mental health and, you know, depression and ADHD.
Yeah,
And, you know, being somebody who practices psychiatry, I really appreciate you being that open with everybody.
Look, this is the guy you asked me.
Hi!
Joy.
Hi,
Who
sweet
is
baby.
this?
Little Pablo.
Oh,
He's
he's so cute.
He's as cute and dumb as me. I'm joking. Yeah, no, but you know, I spent too long just because you mentioned the depression thing and speaking out. I spent too long thinking that it was like a source of shame, like that I didn't want to think of how I feel. And so then when you avoid, like, your old patterns just play out for you. And then it's like, when you actually stop and think about that, you take a moment, as it were. It's funny, something as simple as that for someone as fast-paced as me. It's such the most authentic thing I could do, and I just was like not doing it for so long. We all
You get to become agentic again. You get to become in charge again.
exactly.
Yeah.
And when you're not in charge, it's like who likes to
All
not
over.
be in charge?
Yeah.
Right. I guess my share is also about taking charge back on some level. I saw and I'll make this quick, but I saw a post by Mel Robbins on her Instagram page, and I love that podcast. And it was an interview with a gentleman, and he was talking about how there's so much noise and dehumanization online, and how people respond to us in ways that bring out the worst in us. And he said that a practice that he uses, which I wasn't very aware of myself doing that, but it's definitely something that I've done myself while navigating all the dehumanization in my comments and the attacks that come my way and all those things. He says that when you see a comment like that, you can simply respond by saying, that comment is below my standard for a response. I love that. I thought that was such a simple, you know, talking about simple things we can anchor to.
This is going to be very useful in my family. No, I'm joking.
Maybe on Piers Morgan, I thought
Family
that would be useful
get-together.
for you.
I could see
And in my family, of course,
Yeah.
of course.
family.
And so that was one thing I felt like when we're talking about polarity and we're talking about dehumanization, whether it's coming at us or it's within our own space, there's so much agency and control we can take back when we decide that, you know what, I'm not going to respond to that. That's below my standard for a response. Even if I don't say that out loud, I've chosen not to respond to so many comments online when I used to just get into it and want to prove a point. And
you got to break the feeling that
break
like
it.
there's something good that's going to come out of all those aspects.
Yes. Yes.
Well, I will wrap up with my share and then bring us into our closing prayer. But I really wanted to shout out Sim Kern, Hannah Mushabek, and Interlink Publishing, which is a Palestinian-owned and run indie publishing house, for getting Interlink's first New York Times bestseller in Sim's Genocide Bad, which Hannah invited them to write. It's a remarkable and really digestible read. And I think, Ahmed, given what you just said about sometimes simplicity really is something that we need, just this frame. Genocide is bad. Genocide is always bad. Genocide will always be bad. This doesn't have to be the, complicated discourse that we try to make it out to be in order to, uphold this propaganda. And I think Sim and Hannah's project has done something really phenomenal and digestible. So that's a shout out. Congratulations to Interlink for their New York Times bestseller. That is so cool. If you haven't ordered Genocide Bad, buy it, keep it on the bestseller list for as long as possible. And Ahmed, thank you so much for your time, your bravery, your dedication to truth, the humanity you brought to this conversation, and for spending your precious hours with us. Thank you.
I loved it. Thank you.
Oh, I'm so
Really,
pleased. So,
thank
okay,
you
we
so
have
much.
closing prayer.
Yes.
May all beings everywhere thrive in peace, dignity, and share in all our joys.
And may we see true peace in the Middle East for all in our lifetime.
Amen.
Amen.
Hey, Superhumanizer, it's Katie Bogan here. Before you go, I have a quick ask. If today's conversation moved you, would you please leave us a review on Apple Podcasts or Podchaser? Both links are in the show notes, and your reviews really help us to reach more people who need to hear these stories. If you found this episode valuable, please share it with a friend, a loved one, or anyone who you think would benefit from it. Your reviews and sharing help us inspire more humanity in our world. Thank you for being a friend of Superhumanizer. See you next episode.